I never thought I'd be writing something like this. You always hear stories about infidelity, friends of friends, random posts online, headlines that make you shake your head and think, that could never happen to me. But here I am, staring at a screen, trying to make sense of how everything fell apart. Maybe putting it into words will help. Maybe someone out there will read this and feel a little less alone. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 8 years. We met in college, back when life felt simple and full of possibility. She was studying to become a nurse, and I was working toward a degree in business. Our connection was instant, one of those rare moments where you meet someone and know, deep down, that your life is about to change. We supported each other through the chaos of exams, late-night study sessions, and the uncertainty of what came next. When we got married, I genuinely believed we were building a future that would last a lifetime. The first few years were good, really good. We bought a house, settled into our careers, and started talking about having kids. Life felt like it was falling into place. But looking back, I can see the cracks that started to form, the little signs that something was shifting between us. At first, it was subtle, the way Emily would come home later than usual, claiming she had to cover extra shifts at the hospital. I didn't question it. Her job was demanding, and I knew how dedicated she was to her patients. But then the excuses started piling up: meetings that ran late, last-minute schedule changes, nights when she said she needed to stay at the hospital to help with emergencies. That I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. After all, trust is the foundation of any marriage, right? But something didn't feel right. She started guarding her phone more closely, keeping it face down on the table or tucked away in her purse. When I asked her about it, she brushed off my concerns, saying she just needed a break from the constant messages from work. And maybe that was true. Maybe I was overthinking things. But the doubt had taken root, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it lingered in the back of my mind. Then there were the changes in her appearance. Emily had always taken care of herself, but suddenly, she seemed more focused on her looks than ever before. New clothes, expensive perfume, extra time in front of the mirror before leaving for work. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said she just wanted to feel good about herself. And maybe that was true, too. People change, and sometimes they need to rediscover parts of themselves that get lost in the routine of everyday life. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The turning point came one Friday night. I had planned a quiet evening at home, just the two of us, a bottle of wine, and our favorite takeout. But when I called Emily to see when she'd be home, she didn't answer. I tried again. No response. Hours passed, and my mind started to spin with possibilities. Maybe she was caught up with a patient. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe the sound of the front door opening jolted me out of my thoughts. Emily stepped inside, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something in her eyes, something guarded, like she was bracing herself for a question she didn't want to answer. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down on the table. "Sorry I'm late. Work was crazy tonight." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as she moved past me, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingered in the air. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile and nodded, swallowing the questions that burned at the back of my throat. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong, and I was going to find out what it was. The morning after Emily came home late, I woke up with a knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. The faint scent of cologne still lingered in my mind, a reminder that something wasn't right. I watched her as she moved through the kitchen, pouring coffee and scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. She looked up and caught me watching her, offering a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there. But the words wouldn't come. Without proof, all I had were suspicions. And I needed more than that. That day at work was a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything, my thoughts looping back to the unanswered calls, the late nights, the guarded phone. Every time I tried to focus, I found myself replaying the past few months, searching for clues I might have missed. The long shifts at the hospital, the sudden interest in her appearance, the vague explanations, it all added up to a picture I didn't want to see. But denial could only carry me so far. By the time I got home, my mind was made up. I had to know the truth. I waited until Emily was in the shower, then took her phone from the nightstand. My hands trembled as I held it, my pulse pounding in my ears. The screen lit up with a soft glow, but my heart sank when I saw the passcode screen. She had never used one before, or if she had always shared it with me. Now, it was locked tight. That I placed the phone back where I found it and sat on the edge of the bed, my thoughts racing. The locked phone was confirmation enough that she was hiding something. But I still needed proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to her routine. She seemed more distant than ever, her laughter forced, her touch fleeting. The late nights continued, each one followed by vague excuses and hollow reassurances. But it wasn't until the following Friday that everything changed. Emily had mentioned she'd be working late again, and the knot in my chest tightened as soon as she said it. Something about the way she avoided my gaze set off alarms in my mind. This time, I wasn't going to sit at home wondering. This time, I was going to see the truth with my own eyes. She left the house around 6 p.m., dressed more carefully than usual, subtle makeup, a blouse that clung to her figure, heels she rarely wore to the hospital. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before grabbing my keys and following her. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I trailed her through the city, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. She drove across town, past the hospital, and into a part of the city we rarely visited. I kept my distance, careful not to draw attention as she pulled into the parking lot of a small medical office building. I parked a few spaces away, watching as she stepped out of the car and adjusted her blouse, smoothing her hair before walking toward the side entrance. My pulse hammered in my chest as she disappeared inside, the door clicking shut behind her. I sat there for a moment, staring at the building as my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was meeting a friend. Maybe she had a legitimate reason to be there. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces were falling into place, and I couldn't ignore what they were telling me. Minutes passed, then half an hour. The air inside the car felt heavy, suffocating. My thoughts spiraled with every scenario I could imagine, each one worse than the last. I was about to leave when the door opened again, and my breath caught in my throat. A man stepped outside, his white lab coat unmistakable in the dim light. Tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed hair and a confident stride. He glanced around the parking lot, his gaze sweeping over my car without stopping. Then Emily appeared beside him, her laughter soft but clear as she touched his arm lightly. Their faces were close, their body language intimate in a way that sent a jolt of anger and heartbreak through my chest. I fumbled for my phone, snapping a few photos through the windshield as my hands trembled with adrenaline. My breath came in shallow gasps as I watched them exchange a few more words before the man stepped back inside, leaving Emily alone on the sidewalk. She glanced at her phone, her smile lingering as she typed something quickly, then turned and walked back to her car. I waited until she drove away before starting my own car, my thoughts a chaotic mess of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. The images on my phone burned against my skin like a brand, undeniable proof of the betrayal I had suspected for so long. But even with the evidence in front of me, part of me still clung to the hope that there was some other explanation, that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. I drove home in silence, the hum of the engine barely registering over the noise in my head. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to sit there for a moment just to catch my breath. The house looked different, somehow colder, emptier, as if the walls themselves knew what had happened. Inside, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind cycling through every possible scenario. Should I confront her as soon as she walked through the door? Should I wait, gather more evidence, and catch her in a lie she couldn't deny? The uncertainty was suffocating, but one thing was clear: I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. Not anymore. When Emily finally came home, her smile was bright but strained, as if she could sense the tension in the air. She kissed me on the cheek, her perfume lingering in the air as she set her purse on the table. "Sorry I'm late," she said casually. "Work was crazy tonight." I swallowed hard, the photos on my phone burning a hole in my pocket as I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to confront her, not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed more than just photos taken from a distance. So I smiled and nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs as I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. But inside, the storm was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke, because now I had proof, and soon, she would have no place left to hide. The next day felt like walking through a fog. Every moment seemed to drag, heavy with the weight of what I knew but hadn't yet said. I went through the motions, showering, dressing, making coffee, but none of it felt real. The photos on my phone were all I could think about, each image a reminder of the moment everything changed. My mind replayed the scene in the parking lot on an endless loop: Emily's laughter, the doctor's smile, the way her hand had lingered on his arm. No matter how many times I tried to convince myself there might be another explanation, the truth pressed against my ribs like a weight I couldn't shake. Emily moved through the house as if nothing had happened, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. I watched her from across the room, studying every detail: the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the curve of her smile as she scrolled through her phone, the faint trace of perfume that still clung to her skin. I had memorized those little things over the years, but now they felt like pieces of a puzzle I no longer understood. "Are you okay?" she asked, glancing up with a tilt of her head. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I wondered if she could see the storm raging beneath the surface. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. She held my gaze for a beat longer than usual, as if waiting for me to say something more. When I didn't, she looked away, returning her focus to her phone with a soft hum of acknowledgement that I couldn't keep pretending. Not anymore. By the time the evening rolled around, my resolve had solidified into something unbreakable. I sat in the living room with my phone clutched tightly in my hand, the photos glowing against the screen like a silent accusation. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The seconds stretched into minutes, each tick of the clock echoing in my ears as I rehearsed the words I needed to say. Finally, the familiar rumble of the engine broke the silence, followed by the soft click of the front door opening. Emily stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air, her smile bright but faintly strained. She set her purse down on the table and kicked off her shoes, pausing when she noticed me sitting there with my phone in hand. "Hey," she said, her voice carefully casual. "Everything okay?" I stood slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears as I met her gaze. "Where were you tonight?" Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "I told you I had to stay late at work. A couple of patients needed extra care, and don't," I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. I stepped forward, holding up my phone so the screen faced her. "Don't lie to me, Emily. I know where you were." Her eyes widened as she stared at the photos, the images of her standing in the parking lot with the doctor, their smiles too intimate, their proximity too close. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she looked like she might be sick. "Where did you get those?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I followed you," I said, my throat tightening around the words. "Last night, when you said you had to work late. I saw you with him." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me, her mind racing as she searched for an explanation. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, stepping toward me with her hands outstretched. "He's just a colleague, someone I talk to when things get stressful at work. We were meeting to stop lying." The words burst from my chest before I could hold them back. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else as the anger I had tried so hard to suppress finally broke free. "I saw the way you looked at him. I saw the way you touched his arm, the way he smiled at you. You expect me to believe that was just a friendly conversation? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt, fear, or the realization that she had been caught. It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, her voice shaking. I never meant to hurt you. Then why did you do it? My voice cracked, raw with the weight of everything I had held back for so long. Why, Emily? What did he give you that I couldn't? She swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It started with small conversations, just someone to talk to when things got overwhelming. But then, I don't know. I felt seen. I felt wanted in a way that I couldn't make you feel. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. The words tasted like ash on my tongue, sharp and painful. That's not what I meant, she said quickly, shaking her head as tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I got lost somewhere along the way, and I made a mistake. But it doesn't change what we have. It doesn't have to be the end. I took a step back, the weight of her words pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. You don't get to decide that, I said, my voice low and unsteady. You don't get to break my heart and then tell me it doesn't have to be the end. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, No, I interrupted, shaking my head. You made a choice, Emily. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, you made a choice. And now, I have to make mine. Her breath hitched in her throat, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. You're leaving, she whispered, as if saying the words aloud would make them real. That I nodded slowly, the decision settling in my chest like a stone. I can't stay here and pretend that nothing happened. I deserve better than this. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily stood frozen in place, tears streaming down her face as she clutched at the fragments of what we had once been. But there was no going back now. The words had been spoken, and the damage was done. Without another word, I turned and walked past her, my footsteps heavy against the floor as I moved toward the bedroom to pack my things. Each step felt like tearing away a piece of the life we had built together, but I knew it was the only way forward. By the time I finished packing, the house was silent. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I paused in the doorway, the weight of the moment pressing down on me with crushing force. But there was nothing left to say. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my breath misting in front of me as I stood on the porch and stared out into the darkness. The faint hum of distant traffic echoed in the distance, a reminder that the world was still turning, even as mine fell apart. Taking a shaky breath, I walked to my car and opened the door. For a moment, I hesitated, gripping the edge of the doorframe as if waiting for something, anything that might change what had happened. But no words came. No last-minute confessions or desperate pleas. So I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind the house that had once been my home and the woman who had broken my heart. The night after I left, I sat alone in a hotel room with nothing but the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant noise of the city outside the window. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air, the kind of artificial cleanliness that never quite masks the loneliness that lingers in places like this. The overhead light cast harsh shadows against the beige walls, making everything feel even colder. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase half unpacked beside me, staring down at my phone as if it held the answers I couldn't find. My mind wouldn't stop racing. No matter how hard I tried to push the thoughts away, they kept looping back. Emily's face when I confronted her, the way her hands had trembled as she begged me to stay, the tearful apologies that had come too late. Her words echoed in my head, overlapping until I couldn't tell where one memory ended and the next began. I never meant to hurt you. I felt seen. I love you. Each phrase twisted deeper into my chest, a constant reminder of the life I had left behind. That I wanted to hate her. I wanted to erase every memory of her touch, her laughter, the way her eyes used to light up when she looked at me. But the anger wouldn't come, not the way I needed it to. Instead, there was just a hollow ache where my heart used to be, a dull pressure that made it hard to breathe. I had spent 8 years building a life with her, trusting her, believing that we were in this together. And now, all of it was gone, shattered by choices I couldn't understand. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in the parking lot with him, the way she had smiled, the way she had touched his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. The image burned behind my eyelids, sharp and unrelenting, until I gave up and stared at the ceiling instead, counting the cracks in the plaster as the hours crept by. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed and into the shower, letting the scalding water wash over me in the hopes that it would somehow rinse away the weight of everything I was feeling. It didn't. Nothing did. I moved through the day in a fog, my thoughts a constant jumble of what-ifs and unanswered questions. Could I have done something differently? Had I missed the signs until it was too late? Was there a moment when I could have saved us from falling apart? I knew those questions would never have answers, but that didn't stop them from echoing in my mind. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy, throwing myself into work and doing everything I could to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But no matter how many hours I spent buried in emails and spreadsheets, the memories still found their way in the sound of Emily's laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine, the late-night conversations that had once felt like the foundation of our relationship. Each one was a reminder of what I had lost, and no amount of distraction could make that pain go away. That I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left. Her messages had started coming the next day, short, hesitant texts at first, then longer ones as the days went by. Each one was a mix of apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas for me to come home. I read them all, but I never replied. The words felt hollow, as if no amount of remorse could undo what had happened. Some of the messages lingered in my mind long after I had read them. I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but please, can we talk? I can't stop thinking about the way things ended. I still love you. Please don't throw everything away because of one mistake. I miss you. The house feels so empty without you. Please come home. Each message hit like a punch to the chest, stirring a mixture of anger, sorrow, and something dangerously close to hope. But every time I thought about responding, I remembered the photos on my phone, the late nights, the lies she had told with a smile on her lips. No matter how much I had loved her, I couldn't forget the betrayal that had broken us apart. The legal process began faster than I expected. I met with a lawyer a week after leaving, laying out the situation with as much composure as I could manage. The words felt strange as I spoke them aloud: infidelity, separation, divorce, like they belonged to someone else's life. But the papers in front of me were all too real, each signature a step toward the end of a chapter one had never wanted to close. Emily didn't contest the divorce. Whether it was guilt, resignation, or some combination of both, she signed the papers without argument. The process moved forward with a kind of mechanical efficiency that felt at odds with the emotions swirling inside me. There were no heated arguments, no dramatic confrontations, just a series of legal documents that reduced 8 years of love and memories to a few sheets of paper. Even as the legalities moved toward their inevitable conclusion, the emotional fallout lingered. There were days when the anger burned hot in my chest, driving me forward with the determination to rebuild my life without her. But there were also nights when the loneliness crept in, heavy and suffocating, whispering doubts and regrets into the silence of my empty apartment. That I missed the sound of her laughter echoing through the house, the warmth of her hand reaching for mine in the middle of the night, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. But I also remembered the way she had looked at him, the smile that wasn't meant for me, the touch that had broken the trust between us. As the weeks passed, the ache in my chest began to soften. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed me the way it once had. I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of heartbreak: the simple joy of a morning run through the city, the satisfaction of a good book, the quiet contentment of watching the sun set from my balcony. Friends reached out, offering support and encouragement, reminding me that I wasn't alone. At first, their words felt hollow, like well-meaning clichés that couldn't possibly touch the depth of what I was feeling. But slowly, their presence began to chip away at the walls I had built around myself. Game nights filled with laughter, dinners that stretched late into the evening, conversations that reminded me life could still be good. Each moment was a step towards something new, something better. The day the final divorce papers arrived, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, my hands resting on the smooth surface as I stared at my name printed neatly at the top of the page. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the reality of it sink in. This was the official end of a chapter that had once held so much hope and promise. The love we had shared, the future we had dreamed of, it was all reduced to ink on a page. And yet, as I signed my name for the last time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight that had pressed against my chest for so long began to lift, leaving space for something I hadn't felt in months: hope. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the city lights stretched out before me, each one a reminder that life continued to move forward, even after heartbreak. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs as I let the past begin to fade behind me. There would still be hard days, moments when the memories crept back in and the ache in my chest returned. But for the first time in a long time, I believed that those moments wouldn't define me. I had survived the worst of it, and now, standing on the edge of something new, I felt ready to take the next step, because sometimes, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another. The days after the divorce became official were both heavier and lighter than I expected. There was a finality to it that I hadn't fully prepared for, the knowledge that the life I'd built with Emily was now officially over. No more what-ifs, no more late-night texts or calls, no more hoping that maybe, somehow, we could piece things back together. The papers had been signed, the legal ties severed. All that remained now were the memories, some good, some bad, all tangled together in a knot that sat deep in my chest. At first, the silence was the hardest part. The apartment felt too big, too empty, the absence of her presence echoing through every room. I found myself pausing in doorways, half expecting to hear her laugh or catch a glimpse of her moving through the space. But those moments passed quickly, leaving behind only the cold reality that she was gone. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for overtime and taking on extra responsibilities just to keep my mind occupied. The hum of the office, the steady rhythm of deadlines and meetings, it all became a way to drown out the thoughts that threatened to creep in when I was alone. But even the busiest days couldn't completely erase the ache that lingered beneath the surface. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in fits and starts, haunted by dreams that felt too real, dreams where Emily and I were still together, where her smile still reached her eyes, where her touch still felt like home. I'd wake up in the early hours of the morning, heart pounding and breath shaky, the echoes of those dreams clinging to my skin like a second layer of grief. I tried to move forward. I really did. Friends invited me out, encouraged me to meet new people, to start building a life beyond the shadow of what had happened. I accepted their invitations at first, hoping that the noise and laughter would help fill the hollow space inside me. But more often than not, I found myself standing at the edge of conversations, smiling at the right moments but feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The thought of dating again felt impossible. How could I open my heart to someone else when the wounds from my last relationship still felt so raw? The idea of trusting another person, of believing that they wouldn't break me the way Emily had, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a void I wasn't ready to face. So I focused on the things I could control. I started running again, pounding the pavement in the early mornings when the city was still quiet and the air felt fresh against my skin. The steady rhythm of my footsteps, the burn of my muscles, the rush of blood in my veins, it became a way to silence the noise in my head, even if only for a little while. Slowly, the fog began to lift. The ache in my chest didn't disappear, but it grew quieter, becoming a dull hum rather than a constant roar. I started noticing the little things again: the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the laughter of strangers passing by. It was as if the world had started to come back into focus, piece by piece. One afternoon, I found myself walking through the park near my apartment, watching as the trees swayed gently in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the distant hum of traffic blended with the sound of birds calling from the branches above. For the first time in what felt like months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, not happiness, not yet, but something close. As I sat on a bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages I had saved from friends and family over the past few months. Their words had been a lifeline during the darkest moments, reminders that I wasn't as alone as I had sometimes felt. You're stronger than you think. This pain won't last forever. Don't let her choices define your future. You deserve to be happy. It's okay to grieve what you've lost. Just don't forget to look forward, too. Each message was a thread in the fabric of my recovery, small but vital pieces of the support that had carried me through the worst of it. That night, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey in hand, I let myself reflect on everything that had happened: the love, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the slow process of putting myself back together. The anger that had once burned so fiercely had faded into something quieter, something closer to acceptance. I still didn't understand why Emily had made the choices she had, but I was beginning to accept that I might never have all the answers. And maybe that was okay. The following weeks brought more small victories. I started reconnecting with old friends I had lost touch with, rediscovering the parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of the past. I took up hobbies I had neglected: photography, hiking, reading late into the night just because I could. Each moment felt like a step toward reclaiming the life I had thought was lost, but the biggest shift came when I finally allowed myself to imagine a future beyond the pain. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending that the scars didn't exist. It was about choosing not to let those scars define me. One evening, as I stood at the edge of the river that wound through the city, watching the sun dip below the horizon and cast the water in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that I had reached a turning point. The weight in my chest no longer felt like a chain holding me down. Instead, it felt like a reminder of what I had survived, a testament to the strength I had found within myself when everything else had fallen apart. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Months turned into a year, and life slowly began to take on a new shape. The weight of what had happened still lingered in the background, but it no longer consumed me. The pain, once sharp and constant, had dulled into something more manageable, something I could carry without it defining every moment. Still, there were days when the memories would creep back in, uninvited but familiar, like echoes from a life that felt both distant and impossibly close. After the divorce, I moved into a new apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a modest space with hardwood floors and large windows that overlooked the city skyline, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo on the walls, every book on the shelves represented a step forward, a choice to rebuild a life that had once seemed irreparably broken. At first, the silence was overwhelming. There were no footsteps echoing in the hallway, no sound of laughter drifting from another room, no quiet hum of shared conversations late into the night. But over time, the silence became a comfort rather than a reminder of what I had lost. Work remained a refuge during those early months. I poured myself into my career, taking on new projects and pushing myself to achieve goals I had once put on hold. Success came gradually, each promotion and accolade a testament to the strength I had found within myself. But even as my professional life flourished, there was still a part of me that longed for something more, something beyond the routine of deadlines and meetings. Running became my therapy. Every morning, I laced up my shoes and hit the pavement, letting the steady rhythm of my footsteps drown out the noise in my head. The city streets became familiar in a way they never had before: the cracked sidewalks, the distant hum of traffic, the faint scent of rain in the air. With each mile, I felt the tension in my chest begin to loosen, as if the act of moving forward physically helped me move forward emotionally as well. Friends played a crucial role in my healing. They showed up when I needed them most, offering laughter and companionship when the loneliness threatened to pull me under. Game nights filled with friendly competition, spontaneous road trips that led to unexpected adventures, late-night conversations that stretched until the early hours of the morning. Each moment was a reminder that I wasn't alone. Their support became a foundation on which I could rebuild my sense of self, one piece at a time. Still, the idea of dating again felt impossible for a long time. The wounds from my last relationship had left scars that ran deep, and the thought of opening my heart to someone new filled me with both longing and fear. How could I trust someone again after everything I had been through? How could I believe that they wouldn't break me the way Emily had? But as the months passed, those questions began to lose their power. I started to see that my past didn't have to dictate my future, that the choices of one person didn't define my worth or my ability to love. One evening, while browsing through a bookstore downtown, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Claire. She stood beside me in the fiction aisle, her fingers tracing the spines of the books as she searched for something that caught her eye. Our conversation started with a simple comment about a shared favorite author, but something in the way she smiled, the warmth in her eyes, made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. We exchanged numbers that night, and our first date was a week later. Sitting across from her in a small cafe, I found myself smiling more than I had in months. The conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter coming easily as we shared stories of our pasts, our passions, and our dreams for the future. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people discovering a connection that felt both unexpected and inevitable. As our relationship grew, so did my understanding of what it meant to truly move on. Claire didn't erase the pain of my past, no one could, but she showed me that love could be something new, something different. Her kindness, her honesty, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people slowly began to chip away at the walls I had built around my heart. For the first time since my marriage had ended, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by heartbreak. Of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the ghosts of my past threatened to pull me back, moments when a certain look, a certain word, would trigger memories I thought I had left behind. But Claire never wavered. She listened without judgment, holding space for my pain without letting it define our relationship. Her patience became a beacon of light in the darkness, guiding me toward a place where I could finally let go of the weight I had carried for so long. One evening, nearly 2 years after my divorce, I found myself standing on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the faint hum of traffic blending with the distant sound of laughter drifting up from the streets below. As I stood there, memories of the past flickered through my mind, the late nights spent questioning where everything had gone wrong, the heartbreak that had once seemed insurmountable, the long journey toward healing that had brought me to this moment. And yet, standing there with the city stretched out before me, I felt none of the sorrow that had once defined me. Instead, there was a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that I had emerged from the storm stronger, wiser, and more whole than I had ever been before. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer held me captive. They were reminders of the lessons I had learned, the strength I had discovered, and the love I had found within myself. Claire stepped onto the balcony beside me, her hand slipping into mine as she leaned against my shoulder. We stood there in comfortable silence, the warmth of her presence grounding me in the present moment. As I looked down at our intertwined fingers, a smile tugged at the corners of my lips, a smile born not from forgetting the past, but from knowing that it no longer defined me. I had learned that heartbreak, no matter how deep, was not the end of my story. It was a chapter, a painful, necessary chapter that had led me to this moment. And as I stood there with Claire beside me, the city lights shimmering like stars against the dark canvas of the night, I knew that the best chapters were still to come, because sometimes, the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.